to the Propel podcast, inspiration and innovation to grow your church. I'm your host, Larry Witzel. If God is giving you big dreams for growing his kingdom, then this podcast is for you. Our goal is to offer practical training for effective evangelism in the Seventh-day Adventist ministry context, but we know that the principles we talk about here are applicable in many other churches as well. So wherever you're doing ministry, welcome to the Propel podcast. If you've been enjoying the podcast, please leave a review on whatever podcast platform you're using. Your feedback helps us raise the profile of the podcast so we can get the word out to even more people. And if you want to send us feedback directly, you can email podcast@propelconference.org. Your support really helps as we build this movement toward effective church growth. This episode has another one of those awkward introductions because I'm the speaker for today's presentation. I'm the founder and president of Sermon View and the director of the Propel Conference. I'm also a PhD candidate at Liberty University's School of Communication and the Arts, working on my dissertation on how pastors use parasocial relationships for evangelism. I have a passion for innovation, especially at the intersection of technology, marketing, and ministry. And at Sermon View, we offer technology and services that help churches with digital evangelism and community connection. And over the last 18 years, we've handled over 6,000 marketing campaigns for 2,500 different churches throughout North America. Now, in this presentation, I'm going to talk about some of that study that I've been doing in my dissertation. I talk about the impact of the ongoing digital transformation on society. I explain the potential of video on social media for building parasocial relationships and how churches can use this method to adapt to our digital era. I'm really excited about the potential that this new evangelism framework has, especially for reaching new generations for Christ. And I do hope that you're going to find it a blessing. Before we get to the presentation, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of this episode, eAdventist. Their mission is to provide churches with the best tools for membership and church management. Since 2003, eAdventist has helped Seventh-day Adventist churches, conferences, and unions maintain membership records and serve their communities effectively. Churches benefit from solutions that streamline member records and communications, and conferences can access detailed member records as well as insightful statistics. To learn more about eAdventist, visit eadventist.net and discover how they can support your church's growth and vitality. All right, let's get to the meat of this episode. Here's my presentation at the Monday morning main session of the 2024 Propel Conference, entitled The Digital Transformation of Ministry. Everything is fine. That's what the sign on the door of the police station said. Nothing is wrong, everything is fine. It was 1991. I was in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had just started opening up for foreign missionaries. And I was there with a group from Walla Walla University. There were 5 of us that were touring around. We started in Moscow, and then we were in the Russian Far East. We went to Kamchatka and Irkutsk and Yakutsk. And if you play Risk, you'll recognize some of these names. Petropavlovsk, Kamchatka. So we were there as part of an initiative called Operation Bear Hug, which was sending teams to preach throughout the Soviet Union. This was an initiative led by the North Pacific Union. Does anybody remember Operation Bear Hug? Okay, I see some fellow old people. All right, welcome. Glad to have you here. So our first stop was Moscow, and then we flew 10 time zones over to Petropavlovsk, Kamchatka. Now, this was before the internet, or at least outside of, university research and stuff. This is before mobile phones. So I brought my shortwave radio with me. So that way I could stay in touch with the outside world. And every night we would listen to BBC World News just to see what's going on. And one night, BBC says, there's been a coup in the Soviet Union. And Gorbachev is placed under house arrest. And there's tanks in Red Square, where we had been 4 days earlier. And there are riots in the streets of Moscow. And we were like, what's going on? So we asked our host, what are you hearing?
So she went down to the police station to find out what's going on, and the sign on the door said, "Nothing is wrong, everything is fine." Over the next few days, the Soviet republics started breaking away as independent countries: Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and then Georgia, Belarus, Ukraine. And despite the risk, we decided to stay in the Soviet Union, or what was left of it at that point, and continue our tour. We spent 3.5 weeks there just preaching the gospel, and it was amazing. The crowds that were coming out, they were so hungry to hear someone talk about the Bible after decades of secularism. And if you know your history, you know the rest of the story. Gorbachev was released. Boris Yeltsin negotiated his release, and the coup was defeated, but it was the end of the Soviet era. I was in the Soviet Union as it broke apart. But I had to learn about it from the BBC. And when our host tried to find out about what was going on, she came back and told us what the sign on the police station door said: "Nothing is wrong, everything is fine." When I look at the state of the church today, frankly, I'm concerned. Anybody remember the Net series, Net 95, Net 96? Let me see your hands. Yeah, back when we could send out handbills and people would flock to churches to watch TV. Churches had these satellite dishes up on their roof. Mark Finley's Net 96 had 1,900 churches across the North American division participate. That's almost half of the churches in the NAD at that time. And as a result of those meetings, the year after Net 96, membership grew 2.5%. But the world has changed. The world is completely different today. Back then, when you wanted to go find an auto mechanic, you would let your fingers do the walking through the, yeah. If you had to pay a bill, you would write out and you would put it in and sometimes you would put on it a stamp, yes, and you would put it in the mailbox and mail it. And literally sometimes the check would get lost, but you're like, hey, I put the check's in the mail, it's all good. If you wanted to visit someone, you picked up a phone, a landline, you called them up and you got their address. Sometimes they give you turn-by-turn directions on how to get there, or you would look it up on a map. I was showing my kids the other day what a map looks like. I found in my collection of things out in the garage a map of Vancouver from 1991 when I first moved here. There's a lot of things that are not on the map that are there today as it's grown. But only the wealthiest people had cell phones. And to get on the internet, you had to use a modem. Anybody else brought back to some terrible days of your life? The world has changed. Society has undergone a radical digital transformation. Today, to find an auto mechanic, you use Google or you use Yelp. You pay your bills electronically. If you want to visit a friend, you text them, and then you use Google Maps to get turn-by-turn directions. Television viewing's been declining since 2010. Last year, Americans spent more time watching online streaming programs than broadcast television and cable combined. The computer in your pocket is more powerful than the fastest supercomputers during the time of Net 96. You have instant access to any information, anytime, anywhere. You understand what I'm saying? The world has changed. And as much as I want to believe that sign on the door that says nothing is wrong, everything is fine, it is simply not true. Remember Net 96? The year after that, membership grew by 2.5%. That's not the case today. In fact, a year ago, in 2022, membership declined by 2.9%. Now, it's recovered somewhat, but over the last 2 years, it's still a negative growth rate. Everything is not fine. The digital transformation has led to a rapid, radical reordering of society. Companies who have not embraced the digital transformation are gone. Fortune 500 companies like Sears, Blockbuster, Borders Books, Radio Shack, they missed the digital transformation and they went bankrupt. This digital transformation has changed how we shop, how we learn, how we're entertained, even how we find love. It's changed how we communicate, how we interact with each other, how we experience community. I've watched my teenage children and their friends all looking down at their phones, texting each other as they're sitting in the same room. Yeah, they say, well, you don't want us to whisper, right? I'm like, just talk to each other. In the midst of all this, I've been asking myself this question: what does the digital transformation look like in a local church? If organizations that missed the digital transformation are now gone, how do we keep that from happening to us? What does the digital transformation look like in the church? And then, now I want to be clear. I'm not talking about creating an online-only church. This is not a cyber church. This is not a digital church. People today crave in-person experiences and community more than ever before. And what the church offers is face-to-face present community of faith. So I'm not talking about online church. I'm talking about church online. Not online church, but church online. Those are two very different things. The digital transformation has not made society completely online. We still eat food, although you can have your groceries, order them online and have them delivered now. We still go to restaurants, but oftentimes I'll actually pull out my phone and place an order and go pick it up. You still go see a doctor in person, although sometimes you can do a remote teleconference with them, and you can schedule your appointment online, which you couldn't do before. We live in a physical world, and ministry still happens in a physical world. However, technology has changed how we interact with this physical world. And today, churches are analog islands in a digital society. Churches are analog. I mean, think about it. We send evangelistic invitations through the mail. We expect people to get in their car and drive to the church. And when they walk in, we hand them a piece of paper that we call the bulletin. And then we ask them to sit in a pew where they hear announcements about other activities that they can come to in person. And then they listen to a sermon that someone speaks to them, and then they leave. There's nothing digital about this experience. And I'll be honest, everything I just described is completely foreign to emerging generations, to young adults. And as I've been reflecting on this, I realize we haven't lost the young adult generation. We never had them. Our analog expression of the community of faith is totally foreign to the digital natives. You understand what I'm saying? Yet, as people of all generations live more and more of our lives in this digital world, we're losing our connection with each other. God created humans with the innate need to belong to community. And God has raised up your church to fulfill this fundamental need to belong. We are social creatures, and although church, of course, has a theological component, a relationship, a vertical relationship with God, church is fundamentally a social experience with these horizontal relationships between each other. Your church offers spiritual community where meaningful relationships with others can thrive. Church is fundamentally a social experience. Now, I've had people argue with me about that. But look at the epistles. 80% of the epistles are talking about relationship with each other. And yes, there's some theology, Romans in particular, just incredibly deep theology talking about how God has interacted us. And yet then you get to Romans 12 and it's like talking about each other. Church is fundamentally a social experience. But the fact is, people today live much of their lives in the digital space. And so to begin to understand how your church can reach these people, let's talk about the rise of social media influencers. There's a phenomenon today, particularly among millennials and Gen Z, where people build relationships with popular personalities through social media. The top influencers today have hundreds of millions of followers on Instagram, literally billions of views on YouTube. These people are actively seeking to build relationships with their followers, and then they look for ways to monetize that. They do some specific things to foster relationships, and then they monetize it. They sell sponsorships, they sell merch, they ask people to become Patreon sponsors, they sell advertising. They create these relationships, and then they monetize that. Nielsen Ratings recently said that YouTube is the #1 streaming platform on big screen TVs. Bigger than Netflix, bigger than Hulu, YouTube. On the living room TV, YouTube is the #1. And remember, streaming is bigger than broadcast and cable combined now. So YouTube is the #1 platform that people are watching content on their big screen TVs. There's a YouTuber with almost 4 million subscribers. In 2023, over 70% of her views were on connected TVs. And she said this: YouTubers are different from Hollywood because we have the quality and we also have a personal relationship with our audience. Really? A personal relationship? Through this TV? Well, has anybody here ever heard of a YouTuber named Technoblade? Has anybody heard of Technoblade? Okay, clearly nobody has a 13-year-old who loved Minecraft 2 years ago. All right, Technoblade. When my son was younger, he was totally into Minecraft. He followed a bunch of different Minecraft players, including this one called Technoblade. And Technoblade had over 16 million followers on YouTube. My son would spend hours watching YouTube, Technoblade playing Minecraft on YouTube while he was on a different screen actually playing Minecraft. Okay, so at one point, Minecraft quit posting to YouTube. He just disappeared. He was posting multiple times a week and then he just stopped. And word got out that Technoblade had cancer. Here's a picture of Technoblade on hospice with a special plaque that YouTube sent him when he hit 10 million subscribers. And one day, my son, my 13-year-old son, came into my room weeping. Dad, Technoblade died. And I spent the afternoon consoling my son who had lost this hero of his. And my son joined millions of others online posting this Pig King icon in honor of Technoblade. What in the world is going on here? What? My son had never met Technoblade. My son didn't even know Technoblade's real name until he died. Technoblade had no idea who my son was, and yet here's my son crying because this person died. What's going on here? Well, it turns out there's a ton of research on this, and I've looked at some of this in my PhD studies. My son had built what researchers call a parasocial relationship with Technoblade. A parasocial relationship is the illusion of a relationship with someone in the media. It's a social connection that is one-sided. My son had a relationship with Technoblade, but Technoblade did not have a relationship with my son. It's one-sided. But here's the thing. Parasocial experiences lead to emotional reactions surprisingly like in-person social experiences. One researcher put it this way: human brains are still unable to differentiate between interactions in real life and online virtual environments. Parasocial relationships were first described back in the mid-1950s, back in the early days of television. But recently there's been this burst of research, academic research on this, and a lot of it has looked at the rise of social media influencers and the parasocial relationships that are being formed, especially in emerging generations. Now, social anxiety and loneliness and depression are particularly prevalent among Gen Z. And one way that they deal with this social anxiety is by forming parasocial relationships with influencers online. So remember, they get the same emotional benefit, but there's no risk. They don't have to put themselves out there. If you have social anxiety, you can have this relationship with somebody, but you don't have to put yourself out there. They can sit back and they can watch their favorite YouTube personalities or TikTokers without fear of being judged, but Remember, the emotional reactions to parasocial relationship is almost identical as the emotions connected to in-person social experiences. It may be an illusion, it may be one-sided, but it is very real. One last thing I wanted to mention about parasocial relationships before I move on. What I want to talk about is how you and your church can take advantage of this idea of parasocial relationships. That's where I'm headed. But before I move on, I want to talk about a new trend in influencers. When you think of a social media influencer, what comes to mind? You probably think of a young, stylish, attractive person on YouTube or TikTok, right? But a few months ago, the Wall Street Journal had an article about a new trend, older influencers that are now called grandfluencers. And these are people in their 60s and 70s and 80s who have built large followings on social media. The top 10 grandfluencers on social media today have over 100 million followers combined. Grandfluencers is turning into a big deal. Now, here's the thing. Who is following the grandfluencers? The kids are. 75%, 3 out of 4 of their followers are between the age of 18 and 34. So remember, it's the young people that are being drawn to these parasocial relationships. So these grandfluencers are putting themselves out there and people are attracted to that. As long as you're producing content that's interesting to them, they'll follow. So you don't have to be young and beautiful and stylish to build parasocial relationships with young adults. Anybody can do it. You can do it. I can do it. And as a church, you can leverage the power of parasocial relationships to reach digital natives in ways that you never could before. Your church can become an influencer too. But instead of promoting fashion or promoting travel or promoting technology and selling your influence to the highest bidder, you're going to be promoting a relationship with Jesus and helping people take the next step on their spiritual journey. You can use digital technology to become an influencer for Christ online. People today crave in-person experiences and real life-giving community, but the digital transformation allows us to accelerate this relationship building through digital media. It allows us to break through the social anxiety to connect with people right where they are online. It allows us to get out of the building and reach people in your community 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, sharing the good news of the kingdom and beginning to develop relationships with people in the community. And then when the time is right, we can invite these people to an in-person experience where that relationship can be deepened in a face-to-face encounter. You understand what I'm saying? Your church can be an influencer. So there are 3 interrelated keys to doing this that I want to talk about. First, I don't want you to become an influencer with a global following. Instead, I want you to focus your effort on the geographic area around your church, and I'm going to tell you how to do this. Second, I'm going to share some specific techniques that social media influencers use to build parasocial relationships with their followers online. And then I'm going to talk about how to harvest these parasocial relationships and upgrade them to an in-person, face-to-face relationship. So these are the 3 keys. Stay local, not global. I'm going to talk about how to build parasocial relationships and then how you're going to harvest these. So basically, we're talking about cultivating parasocial relationships in your local community, and then how do you harvest these for the kingdom of God? Okay, so first, you need to focus on local, not global. So successful influencers put massive effort into creating content that's going to be picked up by the algorithm. The algorithm is this big computer, it's driven by AI now, and nobody really knows how the algorithm actually works. Not even the creators of the algorithm understand. Instead of putting massive effort into creating content for this algorithm to pick up, I suggest that you should simply buy a local audience using paid advertising. And we've seen tremendous success with using YouTube with this, and we'll talk more about some of that success in a minute. So each week, you'll create a short video about 60 seconds long, and then you put it on YouTube as an advertisement, and you restrict that to the geographic area around your church. And for just a few $100s a month, you can reach tens of thousands of people in your community. So use advertising instead of the algorithm to target your videos geographically. Now, you may be asking, but why wouldn't I want to go global? Why not go for global influence? Why restrict yourself to just the local area? Well, there's three things that I want to suggest. First of all, social media influencers put tons of effort into creating content that might go viral online, but it's like 1 in 2,000 that gets any traction at all. So you do 2,000 pieces of content and maybe one catches. That's just a lot of work that I don't think it's worth it. So don't even try. If God gives you global influence, praise God for him. But I don't think that should be your focus. Stay focused on the ministry in your local community, which leads to the second thing. Remember, our goal is to draw people to in-person interactions. And if you have global followers, it's wonderful that you have followers in Zimbabwe and Sydney and Singapore, but how are they going to connect with you in person? They can't. God has placed you in your church, in your community, and so you want to put your effort there. But third and most important, I have seen pursuing a large following to be a distraction from your local ministry. I've watched pastors spin out on vanity metrics, how many followers, how many views, how many likes, how many shares. They say what you measure gets done. And I've watched them go from creating solid biblical content to doing silly things just to get views. And here's my question for you. If you had to choose, would you rather have 100,000 followers from around the world or 10 new members sitting in your pews on Sabbath morning? All right? If it's just about numbers, that 100,000 followers sounds good, but the good shepherd left the 99 to go get the one. So skip the vanity metrics and seek those in your community. Use advertising instead of the algorithm to target your videos geographically. Now, let's talk about how to build parasocial relationships. There are three mechanisms that I want to mention that drive the development of parasocial relationships. The first is we know that relationships in general grow when you spend time together. All right? And when it comes to parasocial relationships, it's frequent exposure that is the equivalent of spending time together. So the more you are seeing with different content, the more that relationship gets developed. And so running new ad content every week is going to help you to build these relationships. Second, researchers say that attractiveness does matter, but there are different definitions of attractiveness. You saw the picture of Technoblade. He was not a young, hip, physically attractive person. And yet, he was attractive in different ways. There are not just physical attraction, but there are other forms of attractiveness. There's something called social attractiveness, or how well someone fits in with social groups. So Technoblade fit in really well with the social group of Minecraft players. And there's another one that's called task attractiveness, which is how competent and successful the person is. Again, Technoblade had task attractiveness. He was really good at playing 1v1 Minecraft competitions. And so you can demonstrate competence, you can demonstrate task attractiveness. If you're talking about Jesus, if you're selling Jesus, then all you have to do is demonstrate competence at this. Show what it looks like to be a disciple of Jesus. Talk about your journey. Demonstrate what being a follower of Jesus looks like, and then you've checked that attractiveness box. And then third, self-disclosure is a huge tool that you can use to build parasocial relationships. Share stories of your own struggles. Reveal things about yourself. Be authentic. Disclosing personal facts, especially embarrassing ones, can really help build these parasocial relationships. So I was like, well, how do I demonstrate self-disclosure? And even Lori, even right now, I don't know what's gonna come out of my mouth next. I want to tell you something about myself. I am an entrepreneur. I'm a business person. I'm the founder and president of Sermon View. This is a ministry that's been around. We're in our 19th year. And I believe with my entire being, you can ask any of my staff, that Sermon View is God's company. It's not my company. Now, the government holds me responsible to pay the taxes, but it's God's company. And I am really good at giving the business to him when things aren't going very well. When we first started talking about doing the Propel conference a couple years ago, we were in a slow season and our cash levels were dropping precipitously, as it often does during our slow seasons. And one day, every day, as just part of my normal activities, I happen to see the bank account balance every day. And one day I see it and I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't have enough money to meet payroll that's coming up in a week. And frankly, I freaked out a little bit. I'm like, why are we doing this whole Propel conference thing? I need to go find some money. And that lasted about a day and a half before I realized, what are you doing? This is God's company. It's not my company. And this is his problem. And the next day, when I popped open that screen and I saw that the number was really low, I said to myself this, I wonder what God's going to do about that. And the next day, that's even lower. I wonder what God's going to do about that. And then 2 days before payroll, wow, thank you, Jesus. We got money to meet payroll. And then I spent all the money on payroll. And it's like, I wonder what God's going to do about that. For 8 weeks in a row, every day, I go in and I see that number and I'm like, I wonder what God's going to do about that. So I'm really good at giving things to God when things aren't going well. About 3 months later, we got some fairly big contracts and we got a big influx of cash, and now we're ahead of budget at the start of the year. And yeah, you'd think that that's what I would say. And then one day I found myself just thinking, I didn't say it out loud, but man, look at this business I've built. So then the next month, all of a sudden, we're behind budget, and it's like, what in the world? But then I'm giving it back to God, right? Okay, so this is something that I've been working with, and I've actually been surrounding myself with other Christian business peers, and I've been meeting with them every month. And the reason why I'm doing this is for them to hold me accountable so that when things are not going well, I can say, blessed be the name of the Lord. And when things are going well, they can remind me that it ain't me, it's God. I have this dream for the Propel conference. Look, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a big dreamer. My mom, you can ask her. First of all, she's surprised I've done anything for 19 years because I always have ideas and I never followed through on any of them. And the only reason why you're sitting here at the Propel conference is because God gave me an idea and then my team executed, because this was not me executing anything. I have big dreams for the Propel conference. And I'd like to see every year 350 Adventist pastors and church leaders coming together as a touch point and reminding each other of what we're called to do. I'd like to see every year you guys come back and bringing another pastor, another church leader from the church down the street, and talking about and dreaming about what God is going to do in your church. My dream, now maybe my dream's kind of small, but right now it feels like it's a giant dream. 350 pastors coming together in a church sanctuary like this. Now, last year, we had about 100 people on 101 people on the first night of the Propel conference were in the building. And this year we were at 115. So that's 14% growth. I'm also impatient, and that needs to go faster. But here's what happened. How many of you were here last year? Great. So there's there's probably 70 people here, and 8 of you were here last year. Here's what happened. We actually called every person, Danielle called every person who attended last year and was like, hey, you're going to be able to make it this year. And most of them said, man, really want to, but I've got this evangelistic thing that I'm doing. Well, I'm not going to argue with that. That's the whole point of you being here, is that you go home and you're all inspired and you go do something for God, right? Dan Cole, the video last night during the service, by the way, can we give it up for Kari? He's the one that produced that video. That's an amazingly gifted young man. Dan Cole, he calls me up. He's like, Larry, I really want to come, but we're wrapping up the evangelistic series. And he came to this thing last year, and he got inspired, and that's what happened because he came to the Propel conference last year. And you're going to hear a story tonight about someone, another story, who came to the Propel conference last year, and it's accelerated his evangelistic outreach. So that means that really I need 1,000 people to be coming to the Propel conference just to get 350 here, because you guys are all going to be doing evangelism next year, and I got to go find a bunch of new people to be here. But that's okay. So actually, what I'd rather is that you actually block out April 27 to 30 next year and don't do evangelism during those 4 days, and then you can come to Propel conference next year. But this idea that we come in person and we connect with other like-minded church leaders and we spur each other on toward love and good deeds. Iron sharpens iron. That's my dream for the Propel conference. Okay. Is that enough self-disclosure? Can I move on? All right. Lori told me that I should talk about my hair, but I'm not going to do that. So I was walking down the stairs yesterday, and I heard one of the pastors say, yeah, I'm kind of a rebel. I'm like, not me. I'm as straight-laced as they come. So to foster the growth of parasocial relationships, you need these 3 things: repeated exposure, attractiveness, and self-disclosure. Now, what do you think the most important one is? I'll give you a hint. It's not attractiveness. It's in this order. Repetition is the most important thing that you can do, is being present repeatedly, getting in front of people. And then self-disclosure can accelerate the development of these parasocial relationships through this repeated exposure. And then the last is attractiveness, which you can meet by demonstrating competency and expertise in what it is that you're sharing. So ultimately, anybody can do this. Anybody. Every week, you offer a quick bite of valuable information with self-disclosure built into it. And if you do this consistently, you will build parasocial relationships in your community. And then there's the third thing. Once you have built these parasocial relationships, then what? That's not the end goal. Once you've built these relationships and you're influencing all these people in your community to move forward in your spiritual walk, you're not done yet. Your goal is in person, face-to-face, genuine social relationships. You want to draw them into relationships at your church. So how do you do this? Well, this is where in-person events are so important. I would suggest that about once a quarter, you have some event at your church where you can invite people to, either a bridge event or a full message evangelistic series. Maybe it's a parenting class or a finance seminar, creation seminar, something on biblical archaeology, something where you're offering something of value to the community and you're inviting them through the doors of your church. Do something every quarter where your church members can gather together and invite your online friends to this event. Now, if you're running a new ad every week using this methodology, then use your ads for about 3 weeks prior to the event to talk about the event. So, for example, you could say, hey, you've seen me sharing about the character of God over the last couple of months. And we're actually going to be doing a Bible study starting in 3 weeks on the character of God. There's no cost. I would love to meet you. Click below to reserve your spot. And the key is to offer low pressure, high value events, and then personally invite people to come. Make sure you say, I'm looking forward to meeting you, because remember, you might not have any idea who they are, but if you've been doing this right, they've built a parasocial relationship with you. They feel a connection with you. So leverage that to draw them to this in-person experience where you can meet them and where you can begin to build a genuine social relationship with them, and then introduce them to other church members so that they can begin building a network of relationships in your church, which then strengthens the bond. Does that all make sense? All right. So that's how you can use the power of parasocial relationships in your outreach. There are people in your community that crave a sense of belonging, but their fear, their anxiety are pushing them to these safe online parasocial relationships. So meet them right where they are. Help them build a parasocial relationship with you using geographically targeted YouTube advertising, and then use that influence to draw them into in-person, face-to-face encounters to foster genuine social relationships in your church. Is there anybody that is thinking, I want to try this? Praise God. All right, let me talk to some skeptics that didn't raise their hand. Here's the question. Is this actually effective? So let's talk about that. Remember, we're not interested in innovation just for the sake of innovation. Effectiveness is the most important thing. And the only reason why we innovate is because we can become more effective when we innovate. So is this new evangelistic technique actually effective? And I'm glad that you asked that question, because guess what? This is not a new evangelistic technique. It's been used since the 1950s. George Vandeman was an evangelist in the 1950s, and he got this crazy idea, what if I create these TV programs, and then if I'm going to be going into a community, I run these on the local TV station. Now, granted, there were only 3 TV channels at the time, but he would run these several times a week on different channels, and when he showed up for meetings like 3 months later, people flocked to him because they had built a parasocial relationship with George Vandeman. Okay? So he would personally, in the programs, for each location, at the end of the program, as the meetings were approaching, he would record a personal invitation. I want to personally invite you. And I don't know, if you remember George Vandeman's programs, it was very intimate, sitting in the living room, looking at the TV and building these parasocial relationships with people, okay? It worked in Texas, it worked in California, it worked in Washington, D.C., it worked in Georgia. Thousands of people flocked to his meetings as a result of the parasocial relationships that had been built with him through these programs. And you know what? The parasocial effect still happens when media personalities like Mark Finley or John Bradshaw come into town for meetings. They draw larger crowds because they've developed parasocial relationship with viewers. So here's the thing. A media ministry like It Is Written, millions of dollars in annual budget. They spend, actually, I don't know what the number is today. I used to work for It Is Written, and back, in the early 2000s when I worked for them, they spent like over $1 million a year buying airtime, all across the country. But you don't need to do that, because you don't need to buy time on TV, because people aren't watching TV anymore. What are they watching? They're watching YouTube. And the great thing about YouTube is you can buy advertising on YouTube that's geographically targeted. You can buy ads in the 1 mile radius around your church. And it doesn't cost that much money. You're not spending $1 million a year. You're spending $300-400 a month to get tens of thousands of views every single month. So you'll reach precisely the people who you can actually draw into your church by using this method. Okay, so couple other points of contact. One of our speakers this week is Dr. Hiram Rester. He's an evangelist. He's now pastoring in Columbia. Hiram, are you here? Where are you at? Is it Missouri or Missouri? So where are you at? Okay, so it's definitely not Missouri here. Okay, he's in Columbia, Missouri. And he actually wrote his doctoral dissertation on this method that I just described to you. I have a printed copy of his dissertation that's spiral bound. I got my own special copy. It is marked up, it's highlighted, it's sitting on my desk because what he did unlocked this kind of stuff. At Sermon View, we actually call this the Rester method. It's the Rester method. So he advertised on YouTube for several months prior to an evangelistic series, and he had more young adults at his event than he had ever seen before in 100 series that he had done. And his cost per baptism for those who came to the meetings from YouTube was less than the cost per baptism from direct mail. So in Hiram's case, we know that parasocial relationships were being developed through his advertising because people started to recognize him around town. He told me about going into a smoothie shop, and there's this 18-year-old kid behind the counter who just lit up when he saw him. Oh, are you the YouTube Bible guy? And he wanted to get a picture with Hiram because he knew Hiram. Hiram was this, YouTube famous person, right? And it became an opportunity, it became an opening for having a spiritual conversation with this guy. One more case study. We worked with another pastor who ran YouTube ads for about 6 months leading up to an evangelistic series. Now, he's asked me not to share his name or where he's at because I shared his name once, and then he started getting phone calls, and he's like, I have a job. I can't just talk about this all the time. So at some point, maybe he'll talk about it, but I'm not going to share his name. But I worked with him to follow the Rester method, just like what we talked about here. And at about week 5, he started getting recognized around town. He went in to get a haircut, and there's a guy in the barbershop that's like, are you the YouTube guy? So the conference evangelism director where he's at, he told me that on opening night at the meetings, there were no guests from direct mail or social media advertising, but they had a bunch of guests from YouTube. So the Rester method worked for this church as well. So is this effective? Yeah. You can become an online influencer in your community. You can create a new video every week. You can run it as advertising on YouTube. You geographically target it around your church. And when you do this over time, you'll start building parasocial relationships. And then you'll harvest these relationships by inviting people to an in-person experience. That's it. Anyone can do this. You can do this. The world has changed. And in the church, everything is not okay. Things are not okay. But we serve a God that's bigger than not okay. We serve a God that is bigger than our problems. He's bigger than the difficulties that we face. He already knows how he wants to use these technologies for his kingdom. He already knows how he wants to work through you to build parasocial relationships. And if we embrace this digital transformation, we can reach people in this digital space like we never could before. There are thousands of people in your community desperate to hear the good news that Jesus offers kindness and peace and hope for their world. And by using YouTube, you can share this good news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year long, reaching them right where they are. You can be an influencer for Christ. Please pray with me. Our Father in heaven, Lord, the men and women in this room have taken time out of their busy schedules to come and learn more about how they can serve you more effectively, how we can reach the people in our community in ways that we never could before. And Lord, I just pray that you will give us your vision. I pray that you will give us the courage to innovate in ways, courage to risk failure in order to discover new, more effective ways of growing your church. And so, Lord, as we're headed out to the breakout sessions, And as we're listening to all these different amazing presenters today and tomorrow, Lord, I just pray that each one of us will be inspired with something that we can take home that will ignite our church for growth, and that will result in a huge harvest for your kingdom in every church that's represented here. I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
In case you hadn't picked up on it, reflection is really important to us at the Propel Conference. So I invite you to stop for a moment and think about the things that I've shared in the presentation and how you could apply them to your ministry. What was the big idea for you? How will you apply this in your ministry? What are you inspired to do? And when this episode finishes in another minute, I encourage you to pause for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes and just let your mind wander. This reflection time can be really powerful. Well, that's it for this episode. We'd love to hear from you. Send an email to podcast@propelconference.org, and please mark your calendar for next year's Propel Conference coming to Tacoma, Washington, April 27 to 30, 2025. Special thanks to eAdventist for sponsoring this episode. This has been the Propel Podcast, inspiration and innovation to grow your church. The podcast is produced by the Sermon View crew, and the event recording services were provided by Adventist Learning Community. I'm Larry Witzel, wishing you God's richest blessing in your evangelistic journey. Please join us again next time for another episode of the Propel Podcast.